Hi, everyone. I am Lorianne. I am that gal from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I am with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas, and we would like to welcome you to our Lift Your Story podcast.
So, in this episode, we have Sarah Holliday. She is right now working on her doctorate. We're going to learn more about that and her story. Thank you for being here, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so Sarah, you're in school, you're in Maryland, correct?
Correct. I am.
So, and you said you did some teaching as well?
Yeah, so I actually am working higher education as an administrator in career services. So that involves as an assistant director for operations, technology, and programming. I also teach part-time at a local community college. I've been teaching for about 7 or 8 years, and I'm actually working on my doctorate in information and interaction design, which is kind of, yes.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So that kind of involves a lot of artificial intelligence, user experience, those sorts of things. And the goal for me is to relate that to education. I'm thinking more either K through 12 or higher ed in regards to how we teach, which I think is a good process we're in now with distance learning. It's opened my eyes to a lot of things. And so now I have some wheels turning in a sense about how to make that work.
So you mentioned artificial intelligence. Are you a creator or a developer of that, or you just how to apply it?
So I'm a mixture of both. I realized early on I'm a hands-on learner. I learn best by doing. I can read, but then I have to do. So the person who reads the instructions, that's kind of me, but not really. I usually look at the picture and figure it out. So for me, I think at this point, I'm more into developing because that's where, in our industry, we say I get the creative itch. That's where my brain just kind of goes and flows, and I get tunnel vision and my mind kind of thrives. So I think 2 or 3 days ago, I started writing ideas about what I want to do. And I started around 5 p.m. I don't think I finished writing things until about midnight. And my brain just kind of went. So I think for me, it would be more developing for me, for sure.
Well, that's interesting because I'm a visual learner myself, and
Okay.
I have to, I need to do it. I need to actually do it. Reading about
Yeah.
it, and so like if we get something put together, first thing I do is throw the instructions aside, and start looking at it, and then my wife says, "Wait a minute, according to this, part A, you got to do this." So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it definitely can be a struggle sometimes, for sure.
Yeah, really. But so if you spend all that time writing down your ideas, that's a pretty good amount of focus to stay that long on that
Yeah.
one task.
I think I forgot to eat dinner that day. I just have these ideas sometimes. And I think where we currently are with COVID and just how education is changing in general, I think at some point we usually are behind the curve when it comes to technology. And my thought is, how do we get kind of on board or kind of ahead of the game? But we have to also think about budgetary restrictions at the same time. And so I remember in my master's program where I studied instructional design with a focus on training and performance improvement, they predicted within the 5 to 10 years we would be in this space. And now here we are. And even though we predicted this would be a possibility, we still weren't prepared for how it happened. And I think part of it is we weren't prepared for how fast things would go. But at the same time, I think we in higher education in general, think we have more time than we actually have. And we go through these spirals of meetings and we go through these whole ideas of evaluating budgets. But we don't think that sometimes we just have to make a decision quickly rather than prolonging, because what happens is, like we're facing now, students are graduating and they might not have all the basic skill set to be prepared for life after K through 12, or even life after college, depending on where they're attending college. So my goal is to try to figure out how do we get ahead of that, where our students are more prepared for life after and not feeling that they wasted time and effort and aren't prepared for life from what they currently know now.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because my son is an electrical engineer. And
Okay.
when he was in college, they had people from industry come in to talk to him, from different industries. And one that said, look, you guys have got 40 years to work after you graduate. And that 40 years based on technology now, how
Mm-hmm.
it's advancing, you're going to have to retrain probably at least 10 times
Mm-hmm.
by the time you retire. And if the technology keeps going like it is, maybe even more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So, the technology is rapidly changing and it's hard to keep up with it.
It is. It is. It's very hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm behind and I'm studying it. And I'm like, man, that is one industry that is going to continue to grow and fast between that. And I think the prediction is also with healthcare. They're going to go very fast. And their idea is that healthcare and technology are going to then mesh at some point more than they do now. And I think with what we currently have going with the pandemic, I can see that definitely being the case in the near future, probably sooner than we think. To be honest, we rely on it a lot. You think about cell phones, like we could do so much with cell phones. There are many computers, but what was life like before these? We kind of forget, like the first cell phones were huge, then there were flip phones, and the flip phones, you didn't have much you could really do in a sense. So then they came up with, things like the Nokias that weren't flips, but they kind of look like remotes a little bit. And then you kind of got confused when you were at home with which one was the remote, which one was the cell phone. And so now it's like we have many computers, expensive many computers at our fingertips. And it's like, you ever think you lost your phone, you feel like your world is over, like you don't know how to function because we rely on them so heavily. And it's like, what were we doing before they became, what they are now for us?
Well,
Yeah.
you say that because everybody's life is in their phone.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, I was at the doctor's office one time and they asked me, well, what's your mother's phone number? I go, I have to go out in my truck and get my cell phone. I don't know. You don't know your mother's cell phone? I go, I don't know my wife's cell phone number. I said, I've got a medical alert necklace I wear. If I need to look at it, I'll pull it out and say it's this. Because everything's in your phone.
Yeah.
I remember when we used to have to carry two, though. We had the cell phone, but we also had, which I absolutely loved, was the Palm Pilot. I couldn't live without it.
Yeah, I remember.
And now they're all
those.
merged together, thank goodness. But that was, calendars, everything, they're all there. Yeah.
It's like our world has definitely become so tech driven and focused that we think about life. And, if you think about technology, it's grown rapidly over I guess 15, 20 years. But I remember when we didn't have internet, I remember the first Apple computers, those things were huge, and now you have laptops and desktops that are like paper thin, but they're so functional. And it's just, the world has changed. I have a nephew that's 4, and today we went to Target, and it's amazing how he knows how to do so much at an early age. And I was very shocked because he asked for my phone, and I'm thinking, okay, he'll just look at it. I don't know what he's going to do with it, but some kind of way he followed my fingers when I was putting in my code so that he knew how to get into my phone. And I was like, how did he figure this out? I didn't show him the code. I just moved my thumb to certain numbers, but he figured it out. I was like, this is becoming interesting. That are we going to have more youth going into engineering now, or things more tech oriented, because they grasp the concepts so easily, just like they learned their numbers, like their letters. They're grasping concepts so easily now, and it's just amazing. I was shocked. I really was. Then I realized I need to change my passcode at the same time. So yeah,
that's actually interesting. We had computers since my daughter is now 27. Yeah, she just turned 27. But we've had computers since she was 3 years old. She could use the computer. Even at 2, she was functional on a computer, but she couldn't talk. She could use a computer. And I'm sitting there going, what is wrong with you? You're not talking to me. You can get on there. And she took it up so quickly. And in fact, believe it or not, she's going back to university now and getting her engineering degree. So there you go.
Oh, nice. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Roy, you had a question? I cut you off.
Well,
So
I was
sorry.
just going to talk about that. I was one of those, push me, I'm screaming going into technology, right? So I had a flip
Uh-huh.
phone. It would just, it would basically, all I knew to do on it was answer the phone and voicemail. That's about the extent of my expertise, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going in, I had to get a new phone. So I tell the guy, I said, look, I want the most low-tech phone you have. I just need to be able to make a call, receive a call, and get voicemail. He goes, I can't help you.
Oh,
What do
wow.
you mean you can't help me? He said, every phone has a camera, this.
Yeah.
I said, okay, let's back up. Give me the least technical, phone. She said, it'll be this one. So, all right. So I'm standing up there at Verizon, waiting to check out.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lady there, and she's probably about 10 years older than me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So she's finishing up, and she looks at me, and she goes, oh my gosh, can you believe it? These telephones? I go, yeah, I'm right there with you. And she says, well, I don't know. I said, do you have any grandkids? She goes, well, yeah. Well, they're like 7, 8, 9 years old. She goes, well, yeah. I said, give your grandkids your phone and tell them you want to do this. They'll show you how. And she looked at me kind of like, are you nuts? And so the lady behind the counter goes, yeah, that's what most people your age do.
Yeah, that's definitely a good strategy. Yeah. That's funny. So yes, technology is definitely growing for sure.
Well, yeah, but so speaking of engineering, so here in Texas, we have something called STEM. It's science, technology, engineering, and math. Do you have that there?
We have changed it a few years ago to STEAM, which includes forms of art as well. So now some of us are still saying STEM, but we're starting to transition into STEAM. And I think STEAM involves some things like architecture. There's some, I think graphic design may be a component of that as well. So there's some parts of art that are considered part of STEAM.
Okay.
So yeah.
So are you finding that the girls are starting to go into that direction?
I am. And so I am. And it's very interesting because I was that girl growing up. I was that girl that liked to take things apart and figure out how to put them back together. I remember when we were younger, my brother and I took apart our VCR and we got in trouble because we thought we put it back together properly, but we did not. In fact, the VHS would shoot out a lot further than it was supposed to. And the reason we took it apart because we wanted to figure out what each part of the VCR did. And we thought if we put it back before mom got home, she would never find out. Now it took her some time, but I think a few months have passed and I think she put 2 and 2 together. And I think she put it together because my brother didn't follow my instructions. And I think we were eating, I forgot what we eat, chips or something at the time. And so a part of those things kind of came out of the VCR when I think it was Beauty and the Beast or something of that sort came up with the VHS. So I definitely was that girl for sure. I always enjoyed the sciences, the technology. I took tech ed, I think 3 times in high school as my elective because I enjoyed it. And it was difficult because growing up, I learned gender roles very early. And so girls usually don't go into those things. Girls usually like home economics. They like child development classes. Even though I enjoyed those classes, my niche was the technology courses. And as I continue down this path, I'm seeing more girls going into the technology. I'm seeing more of them feeling more comfortable with that. I'm seeing more girls like in engineering now and more of the sciences like biology and chemistry, and there are boys there, but the girls are really finding a niche and feeling comfortable. And I think what helps them is a lot of times they're walking into a room of someone who also looks like them. So there's a more sense of feeling like you're at home because someone who looks like you is also in the room. And most of the time when you have these classes being taught, they're usually males teaching them. And so I think there's a certain dynamic and an additional layer that comes when you have a woman teaching these classes or, going to youth centers and helping youth learn things like coding, which I had to learn rapidly. things like graphic design, which I'm going to be honest, is not my niche at all. So I'm definitely seeing more girls going into it, but I'm also seeing more parents feeling comfortable with their daughters going into it and not forcing them down a traditional route that we would think girls will want to do more. So I think that also helps because they're free to be themselves. They're free to find these things intriguing. And I've noticed that the boys, when they interact with the girls, feel comfortable because they automatically assume a girl isn't going to know. A lot of times the girls know slightly, just a bit more than they do, and you can see how they can work together. So I definitely think we're going to see more girls and more women going into this industry, which I think is a great thing because having a diverse set of people in this industry definitely helps when you're thinking about your users, when you're thinking about your product, all of those things.
Well, it's funny because I don't know if you know who the baseball player Alex Rodriguez, they call him A-Rod.
Yes,
So
I've heard of him.
in
Yes.
the 90s, he had an office. He had an office in Dallas. And the company I worked for, we did the electrical on it. And I was at a meeting, pre-construction meeting. And the architect was a woman. The electrical engineer was a woman. The mechanical engineer was a woman. The designer was a woman. Everybody involved in that project, you know, on the that end of it was a woman. And that was, and I mean, I've been in meetings with other women architects and engineers, but that's the first time the whole design group was all women.
Yeah, it can get
Pretty
interesting sometimes.
Back at another meeting I was at one time, there was a female architect. And so we're in a meeting, and so we had a little issue with the drawings, and we're trying to work through it. And so the general contractor goes, "Oh, now, honey, you know, let us help you with this because, you know we know about construction." And she said, "Number one, I'm not your honey." And she said, "I'm a licensed registered architect. So believe me, I know about these drawings. So let me tell you." You know, and I mean, boy, it's like, whoa, whoa. You know, I mean, it was a little bit uncomfortable, but you know, I understood, you know. But, you know, she took up for herself. She didn't back away.
Yeah, you definitely find yourself doing that sometimes in the industry, especially when you do not represent what people would normally expect. When you are typically, if you're younger, if you're a woman of color, if you don't fit that typical thought of what people think you should be, that definitely comes into play. I've gone into meetings with a young woman I remember who was a construction manager, and she walked in, she had on a suit, she had on her heels, her hair, she had it kind of laid on her shoulders, and she had on makeup, and people automatically assumed she was the executive administrative assistant. They did not think she had the position that she had. And I remember someone saying, "Oh, I figured you would have on a reflector vest and construction boots." And her response was, "At one point I did those things, but now I have a different level, you know, in the industry." And I thought, we face that sometimes. We face that idea of what the person's automatically going to look like before they walk in the door, and we're not always conscious of how we respond to that, and we're not always conscious of how we process our facial expressions or whatever before we speak the words that we want to say. And I commended her, and I thought it was great that she was able to take that moment, even though you can tell it wasn't the most comfortable because the person was very loud, and there were men in the room. She took that moment to not only reflect and educate someone, but also realize that, yeah, I'm going to have to get used to that. And I remember asking her, how does she adjust? Because sometimes when I walk in the room, I get those same looks, I get those same thought patterns. And it's like, how do I do this in a way where I'm not combative, in a way where I'm not making someone feel less than, but at the same time understanding that I deserve to be there just like other people, and that I have the credentials to be in that room. And the work she did on in that meeting that she was doing for a building, the work was great. I mean, she knew what she was doing. She knew how to manage her team. So yeah, sometimes you get that for sure. And in my program, I um, usually am well, our classes, sometimes we have master level students, but most of the time in the doctoral classes, they're mostly males. So you don't get too many women in the program. And I remember when I enrolled in a program, admissions gave me that heads up. Be prepared to be the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
So.
Well, speaking of that, like I've worked with a lot of women that were managers, construction.
Mhm.
I worked with a lot of them that were facilities people, and
Mhm.
even in the high-rise buildings downtown, there's a lot of women there that are in charge of the maintenance and the
Mhm.
facilities. So I've experienced that. I know, and you can't assume somebody just because they're a woman doesn't know about all the stuff that's involved in that job.
Mhm.
Most of them I've ever worked with, they've all been very competent.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
But
Definitely.
I don't, you can't just assume because somebody's a woman, she doesn't know what she's doing.
That is very true. That is very true. And I remember my first year teaching in college, I had a colleague that felt that way. I was the youngest in the department. I think at that time I was about 25 or maybe 26. And everyone was either retired teachers or they had been teaching for a while and they were either part-time or full-time. And here I come walking in to the room for a training, and the automatic assumption was, and I still get this sometimes, is I'm a student and I'm in the wrong room. And so I'm like, well, actually, no, I believe this is the faculty training, correct? And they go, yeah. I remember one time I'm like, well, I had they asked me to take in the tray to help catering. Like, oh, thank you. So you're here for the food. I was like, actually, no, I actually belong here as a faculty member. And they just stand back and they look like, oh, okay. And it's like, yeah. And I remember someone asking, not only referencing my age, but my credentials and if I had the requirements to teach. And the idea was that because I was the youngest, that I didn't know what I was doing, and that hiring me was going to be something where they just needed someone to teach a class. And so they called me type of situation.
Like a
Yeah.
substitute teacher.
Yeah, it was like and so the person said, I'm working on my master's. I said, oh, that's great. I have 2 more months and I'm finished. And they looked at me like at the point I was, they felt that with my age I should be focused on other things, but not furthering my education. And my thought was, I think this is a good moment because a lot of times when you're in college, you don't have someone you feel like you can relate to, or you feel that sometimes it's a matter of someone bringing the information to you in a different light. I was teaching a developmental reading and writing course, and so a lot of those students are underprivileged youth. A lot of them barely made it through high school at the appropriate reading level, and so they were now coming to a community college to get to the level of where they could be college ready for English 101, and all those types of readings that will come along with that. And so at the time, the curriculum for that course focused on vocabulary and reading comprehension and strategies. And I had to find an innovative way to do those things, whether it was relating it to music, whether I had to watch certain TV shows to get them to understand what certain words meant. It was different, but the students enjoyed it. But at the same time, the students also thought I was one of them sometimes. And so I had to set boundaries. I had to make sure my attire was more appropriate. It wasn't anything where I dressed like them, but they knew based on how I looked, I wasn't, the traditional age most people would think for someone teaching in higher education.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I don't know how it is in Maryland, but here in Texas, we do have kids graduating from high school that can't read.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Mm-hmm.
just, because it's just, get them to the next class. Don't worry about it,
Yes.
and our education system needs an overhaul, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or
Yes.
if they're not learning what they're supposed to, hold them back till they do.
I agree.
Push the problem to the next teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a couple one of my daughter-in-laws is a teacher, and she has a lot of frustration. She's a ESL teacher, and
Hmm.
and a lot of those parents think that well, you're supposed to teach them everything.
Yes.
She'll tell them, no, you have to work with them at home. I can only do so much. I'm not the parent. I'm just the teacher.
Right.
You have got to
Absolutely.
spend time with them. You got to teach them. You got to get them up where they need to be. Well, I work 2 jobs. I don't have time. Uh,
Yeah.
but they want
Hmm.
to complain to her that she's not a good teacher because her child's not learning. But then
Hmm.
as a parent, she's not doing anything to help.
Yeah, that's the hard part. So it goes back to that nature versus nurture type of situation. I think some parents assume that, teachers are the parent. And so they are supposed to give, they're supposed to be able to give that one-on-one attention. And if you're teaching a class of 25 to 30 students, you cannot within maybe an hour, hour and a half, give, per subject, give every student one-on-one attention. You still have to make sure you're managing classroom behaviors. I remember when I was, my internship when I was an elementary education major, it was hard. We had second graders, and there would be one child who liked to pluck someone in the back of the head. There's another one who likes to dig up their nose and put it on others. And so how do you how do you manage that and still give everyone one-on-one attention? And then you in your classrooms, everyone has a diverse learning style. And so, your visual learners are going to be different than your auditory learners, and they're going to be different than your students who are more hands-on. So how do you give every student that one-on-one attention? You really cannot. And then, as an ESL, teacher, that's even more difficult because a student's learning another language, and then their brains could still be change, but it's going to take more time because they're not like in the toddler phases where they can be multilingual and know how to shift. And so that's hard. And yeah, I think some parents assume school is the parent when it's hard to do that. And I could still understand having to work multiple jobs, but sometimes as a parent you have to know when it's time to step up and do your part.
Right.
But I know that with my ex-husband and I, we did work long hours. And also you have to take into account some children don't work well with their parents when it comes to teaching. So the option is get a tutor. And that's what we did. We found a wonderful tutor. They loved her. And so for that extra that they needed, we did that. And I know not everyone can afford it, but they're quite, they're not that expensive if you look into them, and it's worth the education,
So that's true. I remember, so I'm the oldest, there's 3 of us. But then my mom later on in life had my youngest brother, and my mom worked for a law firm, and she was an administrative assistant. And as the oldest, I remember at times helping my siblings with their homework and having to do mine at the same time. The one thing I would say, even though when my parents divorced, my mom became a single parent, was she still found a way to make time. She still found some kind of way of making sure homework was done, that it was checked, that we followed instructions. And as I had gotten older, I took more of that role at the same time. What was different for us is that I think for some parents in the world we are now, you have to work more than one job to provide. And I think some parents are now becoming stretched very thin because they don't just have to work, they may have more than one child. And now when I was growing up, you kind of could have trusted more people with your children, but now you really can't because there's so much more going on in the news. With technology, people are more on board with recording things. And so I think for a lot of parents, they may feel stuck. And then when they get in higher education, and these are the same students I work with, they're feeling the pressure even more now because they're going to school, their children are in school. And with COVID, it's like, how do we all learn in the same space where we don't have all the resources we need? And at the same time, I'm not sure how it is in Texas, but in Maryland, there are some counties that have more support than others for these things. And so if I live in an area where there isn't much support, there isn't a lot of funding, how do I make sure my children still get what they need? And at the same time, I don't know what I need. I'm trying to figure all of this out too. So now we're all stretched thin, we're all stressed. And sometimes you don't have the support system you need. So I think any parent who can afford tutoring, that's great. I think any parent who can find the support system to help them is amazing. But as time is progressing and as we look at how the world is now, a lot of our parents cannot afford those things. They can barely afford food. They can barely afford appropriate housing for their children. Growing up, we moved around a lot. And some of the homes we lived in weren't the best. And it wasn't intentional. It was a matter of, this is the best I can give you at this moment. And I think more and more of our parents are in that space. And it's very unfortunate.
Sure.
Yeah, well, you're right there. You're right. Well, Sarah, thanks a lot for being with us. We really do appreciate it. Enjoyed meeting you and talking to you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I very enjoyed this as well.
Thank you.
So, Lorianne, did you want to tell her about sending her the information?